And we are off to see the Wizard. Hello again, everybody. Dave LaMont for your Nooner with Dave LaMont on October 2nd of Friday. And this will be a Nooner like none other. Let me tell you something right now, everybody. It's going to be different. I promise you. And it's going to be a boatload of fun. A few sports items. I just checked. No more positive tests for Titans other than the newest one that popped up, I think, yesterday. So remember, no Titans Steelers this weekend. They'll be playing that down the road. They decided not to do the Monday-Tuesday dealio. Yes, they are still going to play Game 2 of the NBA Finals. It might be against our better judgment to have to sit through that because if the Heat cannot bring Dragic, if they can't bring Bam Adebayo, and you're going to have a hobbled but game Jimmy Butler, yeesh. Those guys were healthy when things started to go badly. I think one of the biggest moments of that first game was Bam Adebayo being sent to the bench on a second foul call. And after, the Lakers were already starting to percolate, and then that was the end of that once he took to the Pines. I am not optimistic. I wrote about it a little bit on the Facebook and on Twitter the other day that this could be a very short-lived series if they can't figure out. First off, I don't think the Lakers are going to shoot like that, and I expect the Heat will shoot better. But nevertheless, with the injuries, I don't know. It just may be one of those, hey, good try, glad you could do it kind of things. Boy, good job of the weather forecasters who worked with Major League Baseball yesterday. A round of golf applause for that Marlins-Cubs postponement. There were some lovely pictures on the interwebs of a sun-filled Wrigley Field. So I guess they'll try again today. I know that, let's hope they get it right. But typical for the Marlins' weird kind of season that they had to endure yet another delay for some. In this case, it wasn't obviously virus related, but it was still kind of silly. And don't ask me who benefits from that because I don't know. For the Dolphins, you've got a Seattle team coming here for a 1:00-er. Now, this used to be in the old days of the Orange Bowl and Don Shula. Easy pickings. I mean, even good teams who were playing 3 time zones away would come to town for those 1:00 games, 10 o'clock Pacific time, and they were just victimized. I don't know about Seattle. They're playing really well. Russell Wilson is as good as any quarterback in the NFL right now, and if you don't believe me, maybe only Mahomes is better, even over Lamar Jackson, who didn't look especially sharp throwing the ball the other night. But obviously the damage he does as he improvises is pretty severe. So you just can't predict that Seattle is going to walk in and just destroy the place. Chris Carson is likely not to play. The Dolphins have to be feeling better after manhandling Jacksonville. I realize just about everybody will be manhandling Jacksonville, but still, somebody had to do it. And I would hope that the game is a little better than last night's. I didn't watch. I had nothing to gain by watching that Denver-New York Jets game last night. However, apparently I should have, because there were lots of cheap shots from a Greg Williams-led defense, which has never happened before, to the point where Denver's coach didn't allow his players to do post-game high fives, handshake, elbow bumps, whatever these guys do in the age of Corona, and pulled everybody off the field. He didn't acknowledge Adam Gase, and frankly, why would he? But because he was really irritated at the cheap shots that were happening even late on his quarterback, no less. And he's already down to, I think, a guy who works at a John Elway dealership in Littleton. I mean, that's how crippled they are at the quarterback position. And yet the Jets were still trying to injure Brett Rippon. And don't tell me they weren't, because this is a Greg Williams thing, all right? And I know Jets fans are crazy. Well, they have to be. But no, I'm sorry. I'm going to go with Vic Fangio on this one and say that there might have been some intent behind all of that. The other thing I am curious to see today, and I don't know what if the Padres are playing today, but the next time they do, I want to see Fernando Tatis Jr.'s first at bat to see which ear he gets the fastball in. Now, I have I'm putting up 2 zeros here, trouble with bat flippers. You know my philosophy on that. You want him to flip the bat? Don't give him a pitch to hit for a home run. Pitch better. Now, did he oversell that one? A little bit. But I watched the video a couple times, and I was entertained. I have to admit it. And he went about 45 feet up the line before he decided that maybe I better jog this thing out. So, the old unwritten baseball rule, guys show up, yada, 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 yada. Justice. For justice, you must go to Don Corleone. And with that, I need to bring in my guest. But before I do that, I'm going to do something incredibly unprofessional. So give me a moment, because this is only appropriate for these two guys. So I'm going to do something that must be done for this interview to be official. All right. I know these guys know what I just did and the significance of it. Turned out the lights and turned them back on. This means only one thing. This interview is now being held outside the sanction of the National Wrestling Alliance, and we can go to town. I am joined by two gentlemen who are celebrating their third year of a really unique and entertaining podcast called Breaking Kayfabe. Jeff Bowdren, Barry Rose. Guys, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're saying that now, Dave. Wait about 10 minutes into this.
Give it a minute or two.
Yeah.
Well, if it's anything like the Facebook page, there are times that I want to throw my computer in the water when I see some of the things that come out of your Facebook page, of which I'm a member of the Breaking Kayfabe. Wow. But the principal reason is to talk about your experience in the world of professional wrestling and your love of it. And Jeff has written books on this subject, and they call me Booker is one. Breaking Kayfabe is another one, which talks about a series of interviews where how the hell you went to the same restaurant 37 times in Fort Lauderdale, I don't know. Did you ever pay after a while? Did they make you pay?
No. No, the guy that hosted the events always paid. He was very gracious.
Well, that is very gracious.
Jeff never paid for a meal in his life.
Never.
Let's break kayfabe on that. Absolutely.
All right. So for people who are tuning in, and I've used the expression "break kayfabe," Barry, and you just used it. What is breaking kayfabe for the maybe somebody who doesn't know what that really means?
Yeah. So kayfabe was the official language of professional wrestling when professional wrestling was kind of kept under wraps, when the public wasn't aware of what was going on, and kayfabe was kind of the speak. And I believe, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but the roots originated in carnivals. Sure. It was considered carny speak, and wrestlers would kind of communicate. And if somebody who wasn't in the business showed up, if two wrestlers are having a conversation and somebody who's not in the business showed up, they might say kayfabe, meaning you don't want to talk about it. So when Jeff started the concept of breaking kayfabe, the idea was we were going to talk honestly. We were going to talk truthfully.
Which we still do sometimes.
Well, occasionally.
Occasionally, yeah. Well, the amazing thing is how you've managed to sustain it. And of course, through a couple of crises, Jeff had a health issue that he fought through and continued to do the podcast, where a lot of people would have said, look, I'm just going to dial it down for a little bit. And Barry certainly would have had a lot of willing people to jump in and help, but Jeff fought through that successfully. And Jeff, give folks an idea of your history in the wrestling industry, because you're a little bit more than just a big fan.
Well, I've been a fan since the early 70s, and starting in about the late 80s, I began writing for some of the inside newsletters. I wrote a series of articles for the Wrestling Observer with Dave Meltzer, and then of course I ended up turning those series of articles into a book. I'd already had one book out before that, as you talked about with the dinners with the legends of pro wrestling. So. So I've been on the, I guess you could say, the fringe of the wrestling business for the better part of almost 50 years.
Well, I'll go first. I remember what had first attracted me to professional wrestling. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and this is a while ago. And so long ago, the announcer that we watched was Vince McMahon Sr., and the big superstar, and probably the first guy that I ever who drew me in was Bruno Sammartino, who is as big a legend as there will ever be. And that was the era of the Sheik. And I would watch this guy, and he scared me I'm a child now. He scared me to death. He had fire coming out of his trunks. And how did he do all that? And you had George the Animal Steel was getting going and eating. I mean, that was until my dad told me it was fake. I was about 10 or 11, and I was so furious, I refused to watch wrestling again and broke that when I moved here. And one of the first friends I made in Fort Lauderdale High School was on the wrestling team. And guys, he would smuggle the magazines in his notebook. And you know this, for the magazines then, every cover had some poor bleeding fool all over the place. And I got rehooked into wrestling in the late 70s in Florida, which was maybe as good a place as any to really start getting hooked again because of the talent that came through here.
Well, Barry is Mr. CWF. He's probably the foremost historian on championship wrestling from Florida. So, I'm sure he could tell you that during the 70s, Florida was just loaded with wrestling talent.
Yeah, 100% too. There was, it's funny too, growing up I was born and raised in the state of Florida. And I think to some degree we may have taken for granted how great our professional wrestling was. And then we might travel, like I did go up to the Northeast, and I saw professional wrestling in New York, and I was like, man, this is terrible. This is nothing compared to what we're seeing. So we were fortunate.
Yeah, and I know we all probably would agree on Dusty Rhodes as probably the king of Florida wrestling, although you could argue Jack Briscoe is certainly on that same pedestal. But Dusty was so much more entertaining than Briscoe in the interviews. And as I got older and began to see the business end of it, I didn't really realize as I was a kid how important those interviews were to what was going on.
Sure, you got to sell the program to the fans.
Yeah, it's true too. Dusty's strong point was the charisma aspect. I mean, he was able to draw every single fan that was in a building into the ring with him because he was such a great storyteller. And as the 70s, certainly going into the 80s, and Vince McMahon was obviously able to recognize that, the interview and your charisma became equally as important as to how good you were in the ring. And I think, at least for McMahon in the WWF, I think a lot of guys who might have not been the greatest professional wrestlers were able to have good careers based off of charisma and interview skills.
Well, you look at some of Jesse the Body Ventura, I don't even know if he was a good wrestler, but I damn sure know that, and I think he was the best color commentator in wrestling history, for me anyway. For if you're looking for what you want, entertainment, and a guy who bought in and sold the product well, I don't think anybody was any better than him, but I still couldn't tell you if he could wrestle a lick.
He was not strong in the ring. Before Jesse really broke in the WWF, Roddy Piper was in Georgia as a color commentator with Gordon Soley, and he was really effective also in the ring.
Yes. But Piper could wrestle a little bit, though, couldn't he?
Oh, no, he was definitely better than Ventura in the ring. No question.
When did it get away? Because, all right, we go back, Barry, to the guys like Jack Briscoe, Jerry Briscoe, Mike Graham, Steve Kern. These guys had legitimate skills in the ring. I mean, Briscoe, particularly to me, if I remember correctly, was a great athlete in the ring and had the command of everything. When did it start breaking away from having to have that kind of ability in the ring, and it just kind of became a little bit of a free-for-all and more show than substance?
Yeah, well, and I think as we see Jeff right there with a blatant Cubs reference.
That's okay.
I think some people might say when Dusty became the top babyface, not only in Florida, but arguably the entire country, Dusty didn't have legitimate wrestling skills, where you had guys, everybody that you just mentioned, all, these were, it was the elbow as opposed to a wrestling move or maneuver, and all of a sudden it's an elbow. But you go back, Dale Lewis was in the Olympics. Dale Lewis was a top star in Florida. Roop, Jeff and I, we just had Bob on our show. Bob was in the 1968 Olympics and was a top star in Florida really up until the very end in the mid 80s. So I think a lot of people would say towards 75, going a little further, certainly into the 80s, there was less emphasis on your athletic ability, your amateur credentials, versus what it had been maybe in the 60s and early part of the 70s.
Jeff, I mentioned Vince McMahon Sr., which I'm sure a lot of people don't even know, sometimes think that Vince was spawned and actually was not conceived the normal way. But when did we get out of this regional concept? Because as I started coming back into it as a fan in the 70s, you had territories that belonged to the NWA. You had the AWA. You had the WWF. You had things that were going on in California that nobody seemed to know what was going on out there, but it was happening. When did we start seeing this more central approach to now pretty much it's one big organization and just a couple of smaller ones?
Well, a lot of it had to do with the death of Vince McMahon Sr. because he had sold the promotion to his own son, and his son had the vision of a nationwide promotion or a worldwide promotion even then, whereas Vince Sr. sort of kept, the peace within the other promoters that were around the country. And so once Vince Sr. had sold the company to his son, all bets were off, so to speak. And then that's when Vince Jr. began the nationwide expansion. And so I guess you could probably say latter part of 83, early 84. Would that be fair, Bear?
Yeah, let me say too, Jeff is 100% correct.
Is there a Godfather parallel here? Is Vince Michael?
That's not bad.
I love that. I love dun, 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 dun,
He's not Fredo.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah.
No, he's definitely not. I don't know who Fredo would be on that one. Maybe Bischoff, but
That's a Fredo, sure.
But when it's funny though, with Jeff saying that's what kind of clicked, because here's Vince Sr. trying to keep the peace between the families, and all of a sudden he's no longer able to continue as the godfather of professional wrestling in that manner. And there were definitely some warring factions going on before Vince ended up emerging as the kingpin of all of this and built the I get the letters mixed up now, WWE into what it is today. Do you like what it is today? I don't watch anymore. I'll be honest.
I don't watch it at all. The only show in this country that I watch AEW, and I usually DVR it and fast forward through the parts that I don't really care about. So
yeah,
I don't have to tell you, Dave. It's not the product that we grew up on, certainly.
No.
And there are aspects of the show that I find enjoyable. Most of them have to do with like the interviews. There are matches that are still good quality matches, but they're a different type of match than what Jack Briscoe or even Dusty Rhodes was.
Yeah, and I have to agree. I try to watch what I can. I think part of it too, if we go back to the territory days, we got 1 hour per week. It was Saturdays at 12 noon. And there's, you could turn on the TV now and I don't know, what is there, 10, 20 hours per week? It's overkill. And when you put on a show as Monday Night Raw does, which is a 3-hour show, that's just, I don't think I've made from 8 to 11 an entire show in the last couple of years. I usually fall asleep or I'm watching reruns of like Big Bang Theory at some point.
Well, it's a good point, the link to the show, because you go back to the old championship wrestling from Florida with whom I don't know if we all agree, but I think is the greatest wrestling announcer of them all was the late Gordon Soley, because he played it perfectly. He didn't let on that it was a joke or not real. Let me rephrase that. He handled the interviews. He could be frightened if he needed to be, if somebody went off in an interview, or he knew how to lead a guy. He was, I think, and he taught me what quadriceps femoris was. I never knew that was my thigh muscle till Gordon Soley taught me that. No, but that show was 1 hour. And once you got the hang of it, you knew the last 15, 20 minutes were going to be whacked out. There was going to be something that was going to happen. And usually Gordon Soley would say, we've got to restore order here. Time, and the bell would be ringing, and, an ineffective referee would be flopping all over the place. And there was an urgency that I can't see in a 3-hour broadcast.
Well, first of all, Eddie Graham, who was the owner and operator of Championship Wrestling during all the times that we're talking about after he got the promotion from Cowboy Luttrell, he told and trained Gordon to treat it like it's real.
Mm-hmm.
It's what they call a shoot, and everything that's happening is real. So you treat it like it's real, and that's part of why Gordon was so believable. Was he was treating it like it was real.
One of my great regrets, I used to have a talk show on WIOD last decade, a news show for a while, which I'd be honest, I wasn't completely comfortable doing. And my producer who was a wrestling fan, really tried to get Gordon Solie on the show before Gordon passed. And he just wouldn't do it. He was fearful that he would be made fun of. And we were like, no, you don't get it. These are two people who really respect you. And I respected his skills because that's not an easy job to pull off without looking like a fool. And he never did. And to Jeff's point, he kept his dignity. And in treating it the way he did, he added some legitimacy, even though most of the audience was kind of in on it. And I always felt bad that I could never have a conversation and tell him that as a broadcaster, I really admired what he had to do and how he did it.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be said. When you just said something, too, that kind of struck a chord was that how most of the audience was in on it. And you got to remember, Florida demographically is so different, especially back in those days. So you could go to a card on Miami Beach and yeah, there was a large segment of the crowd that was in on it. But if you went to, let's say, Orlando, where I saw a couple of shows, they weren't in on it. They fully believed. They were ready to storm the ring. They were ready to make it happen. So move away from maybe the bigger cities and get to the smaller cities. And people believed. And that was really the key. I think a lot of the success of professional wrestling in Florida, people were actually believing. Kevin Sullivan did a great job as maybe one of the great satanic heels of all time. And he was receiving death threats. And this is 1982 through like 1986 when wrestling had already kind of been exposed. He's still receiving death threats because people believe he's worshiping the devil.
There's a phrase they use
Jeff
in the wrestling business, Dave. It's called the suspension of disbelief. And that's what, when you go to a wrestling match, Barry and I have been to, probably thousands of matches or seen thousands of matches, but it's that moment when you're watching it and you go, well, maybe. And that's what those fans that Barry was talking about in Orlando, they were still held in the suspension of disbelief. They might have thought, well, this may not be on the up and up, but there's that small percentage. It's like famously they used to say up in the Northeast that the matches up there may have been fake, but Bruno's match was definitely real.
It's impossible to overstate how big he was as a star. And he really didn't have necessarily a style. I mean, he was a very well-built, powerful man, a Northeasterner by birth, Pennsylvania, I believe, right, the Pittsburgh area, if I remember correctly. So that was, and he dominated that territory. New York City, I mean, he is a legend of Madison Square Garden as much as any New York Ranger or New York Nick or Billy Joel or anybody. His appeal right to the very end was universal.
He definitely was a huge deal in that area, and was the sort of almost like a northeastern version of what Dusty became in the South, like a cultural icon.
Yeah, that's a very good comparison. And then you have the other thing that became interesting is we get in the 80s, we started getting the anti-hero heroes, the guys that ended up having a yacht full of fans, and they were bad guys. But they were so good, and I'm thinking of, Randy Savage, the Macho Man, kind of went back and forth. Roddy Piper kind of went back and forth. Ric Flair, back and forth. But these guys were so charismatic and so good in the interview. I can't think of three any better other than throwing Dusty in there. That I remember going to see them a few times, and as soon as they set a toe in that vomitorium to walk out, everybody in that building got up and had an opinion. And that means in my book, they achieved their goal, Barry. They got you to react whether you wanted to throw a cup at them or wanted to get their autograph.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too. And I wonder when you can trace that back, the anti-hero. Certainly I think movies and television, I think media in a lot of ways kind of made it okay. The bad guy is cool. And, there's Jeff and I have talked about it, but Ricky Steamboat is a great example of a guy when he had that great series of matches with Ric Flair in 1989. He was positioned as a babyface, as a good guy, but because he was considered so quote unquote wholesome, coming out with his wife and his child, the fans were actually turning on him and they were going ahead and they were cheering Ric Flair, who was a guy that was whining and dining, multiple women, partying all night. That became cool.
Which was true, by the way. That was not even an act. As it turned out, Ric Flair lived his character, which damn near killed him on more than one occasion. But I don't know what it is. I mean, even now with television, we've just been rewatching Breaking Bad during this pandemic. Walter White did some absolutely horrific things.
Yep.
And who were the fans mad at? His wife,
Yeah.
not him. It was like, hey, go do it, man. Or most of the characters on that show and also the spinoff, Better Call Saul, which is also fabulous, are not good people. They really aren't, but yet we like them somehow. And that's the skill of the producers and the actors and the writers. We still like them.
You know, one of the things Barry and I in our last episode, we did a roundtable discussion. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, Dave, of the show Cobra Kai.
I haven't.
And we talked about the fact that they have kind of switched the roles where Daniel LaRusso, you know, the Ralph Macchio character, is kind of a subtle heel in this show, where Johnny Lawrence, the character played by William Zabka, has kind of started a character switch where he's kind of becoming the babyface. And it's really fascinating to watch them do that.
Yeah, it is. What I think is cool about that too, to Jeff's point, what he just said, Cobra Kai is an amazing show. I think to me, it's right up there with Stranger Things, especially if you like 80s kind of retro nostalgia stuff. But everybody's kind of a tweener on the show. Nobody's, maybe Martin Kreese is bad, but for the most part, everybody's got a good side and a bad side, like in real life, which I think is great. Except for me, I've always got a good side, and Jeff also.
Well, all right. I'll let that comment. I'll let that slide. And one of the things I want the audience to notice is how seamlessly this group transitions from one subject to another. And if you are part of their world in Facebook, you understand that the most heated debates in that room are very rarely about wrestling. It's more about food, movies and TV, music. The music ones. Oh, man, you guys, not you two, but some of boy. And that's kind of what your lifestyles are all about, because you're not just a wrestling podcast, because there's a lot of other people who do that too. But you've managed to incorporate your lives and your tastes into this and kind of invited everybody in. I mean, Barry is in the Philly area, where somehow he is buff despite a cholesterol of 650 on a diet of cheesesteaks and roast pork. Jeff is now living in Chick-fil-A, Georgia, after a distinguished career serving Broward County in the courthouse. And it's amazing how you have put your experiences into this, foods and all of this stuff. That's what I get a kick out of, even the times that I'm cursing some of these people out. It's still fun.
There was no greater controversy, Dave, on our Facebook group than when the question, what is or what was new wave, music? And then everyone started throwing out, well, no, this band wasn't really new wave. They were ska, or this band was punk. And it was just completely ridiculous.
Or Jeff, don't bring up pineapple on pizza.
No.
Polarizing subject.
Where do you stand on that, Dave?
I'm okay with it because my wife likes it.
I can't abide. The dude does not abide by that.
Well, that's okay. But again, my wife likes it. Just so both of you are aware. Happy wife, happy life. Jeff, I know your wife. I know you want to keep her happy. She is the greatest occupational therapist in North America, and somebody who has literally helped me more than once get through some injuries. So I think you need to keep her happy as well. Yeah, my best to her. She's the best. I'm not joking. She is absolutely the best. She has that down to a science. But that's what's fun about all of this, because you could be narrow with what you do, but you open it up to everything and anything. I think was there not a huge one about, or have you done the whole Sammy David Lee thing yet? That's always a popular one.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
I thought so too. Yeah, I seem to remember. I'm a DLR guy myself.
Yeah, I was a DLR guy for years, and then maybe 10 years ago, I kind of got an appreciation for Sammy. It was different. The music was actually different. So to me, it's two different things. Don't bring up any other vocalist, though.
There are no others. There are no others. I just think the music was more my taste. I appreciate Sammy, and I've seen him with The Circle, and he's great with those guys, with Jason Bonham and Michael Anthony, the original bass player from Van Halen. Chicken Foot is another band that was great. But for me, it was that drive of Van Halen, and you let Eddie go. Eddie was a wild horse, a feral, untamed, untrained, crazed man. And then all of a sudden, he's playing keyboards. And it's like asking Babe Ruth to bunt with the bases loaded instead of letting him swing for the fences. That's what bugged me.
Valid point. Valid point.
Yeah, not good. Barry, cheesesteaks in Philly, big controversy. You are frequently photographed at least holding one. I don't know if you have I don't know if you employ a stunt double to eat all that, or you have a workout regimen that you need to write a book about.
It's very high metabolism.
Must be. Yeah. So the guide for folks who don't know, besides the Pat and Geno's, which seems to draw a lot of controversy as well, where would you go? Where do you go?
Pat and Geno's it's a Philadelphia institution. They literally are right across the street from each other. But I think if you're really looking for high quality cheesesteaks, to me, it comes down to three places. There's a place called With or Without, which is in the Northeast Philly section. No frills, nothing fancy. The price is right. The quality of the food is great. You can get Cooper Sharp. You can get provolone. You can get cheddar. You can get whiz, which is great. And I really like the onions. They do almost a White Castle onion kind of thing where they got the little square browned onions and they throw them on. I love it. There's a place called DeNick's, which Jeff, I believe, got one from DeNick's. It's in the Reading Terminal Marketplace. Fantastic. But I think we'll all agree, Jeff, the best I've ever had, and I eat cheesesteaks, I live on them, is a place called John's Roast Pork in South Philly that is just out of this world. It's an experience to go there. You stand in line for 20 minutes. It's like Pink's. You've been to Pink's in Los Angeles?
Yeah.
The hot dog
Same
joint,
thing.
except the food's a lot better, but it's similar. You're waiting. It's, people are talking, and then you get your product and you go, holy cow, this is amazing.
Mrs. Bowdren and I will be going there in the early part of November.
Oh, awesome. Well, DeNick's, the last time I was there, which was last year, I had the roast pork, which is my sandwich, the roast pork, broccoli rabe, and provolone. And it was excellent. That was my breakfast. So, I wasn't screwing around that day. Because my buddy and I went to a Phillies game in the afternoon. And by the way, that stadium kicks ass. That's a nice stadium.
Yep.
Where the team, but the stadium, at least, they can't blame that for it. But yeah, I'm a roast pork, broccoli rabe, provolone kind of guy. And
anybody visiting Philadelphia should make a point of going to the Reading Terminal. There's no question about it.
100%.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yep. I would get that tattooed on my back if I wasn't so anti-tattoo. Tell us more. Where can people find, the Breaking Kayfabe podcast? Subscribe to it. I know you're on all the legitimate and probably a couple of illegitimate sources.
It's available at bowdrenpod.com. That's BOWDRENPOD.com. And our Facebook group is Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren and Barry. We encourage you to check us out.
But no jerks and no politics are the two rules with that page. And I use
jerk another word we use other than jerk, but you're correct.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Let's go for a second back to wrestling. Is there somebody now, and we're leaving The Rock out of it and probably John Cena because they're industries, but is there another guy in wrestling who can now go down the street and everybody knows who he is?
The Big Show, being 7 foot tall and
that helps.
500 pounds. If you're talking about from a recognition standpoint, there's really not. And I would say, John Cena to some degree, The Rock certainly, but a lot of The Rock's fame has come after wrestling because obviously he's. I don't think from a wrestling standpoint there is anybody that can match. Let's say who was the last big wrestling star? Maybe Steve Austin. Stone Cold.
Oh, yeah.
I would say. I don't think there's anybody. There was a guy, and I believe he's part-time now, was Daniel Bryan. And about 5 years ago, Daniel Bryan was reaching this massive popularity and then had what essentially was a career-ending injury, wound up coming back 3 or 4 years later. But I think he was on the road. But other than Stone Cold, I don't think there's anybody. Jeff, am I wrong about that? Or
no, there's nobody I can think of, certainly.
And what does that tell you about the state of professional wrestling today?
Creatively, it is almost bankrupt, in my opinion.
Is it just because, well, are there just no ideas? Are there no more angles you can do?
Well, the guy that has ultimately been the final say, the final decision maker, has reached a point in his life where he's in his late 70s, and I think he may have creatively hit a wall.
Mm-hmm.
And he is. I think there is a fear on his part of giving up his creative control over the product. And we hear stories almost weekly about how they Barry spoke of the 3-hour version of Raw. They've written it out, it's all set to go, and then 15 minutes before the broadcast, Vince comes in there and changes 3 things on it, and now all of a sudden the show has turned into chaos. And it's like, imagine Lorne Michaels 15 minutes before Saturday Night Live is supposed to start coming in and changing 4 of the sketches. Like all of a sudden you've got chaos within the cast.
Well, as Gordon Soley would say, we have to restore order.
Yes.
And
voice in the back, fade to black. That's what he used to say.
Yeah. Well, and I try to remember to do this anytime I'm broadcasting in the state of Florida, but as I'm signing off, I always try to say so long from the Sunshine State.
Exactly.
Because of what his total greatness was. Best angles, 1 or 2 angles. Barry, I'll start with you that have just stayed with you. You thought, wow, whoever thought of that deserves a stay in a vacation home for a week because that was so cool.
Yeah. So luckily, I've been a fan since 1971, and I saw a turn in Atlanta. There's so many great angles. The Joe LeDuc angle, where Joe LeDuc turned into this vicious heel literally overnight in Florida and attacked Jimmy Garvin, got him in a bear hug. Jimmy Garvin's bleeding from the mouth. And that was 1979 in Florida. But I saw an angle in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was Dusty Rhodes and Ole Anderson versus Ivan Koloff in The Assassin. Was it The Assassin? Am I right?
Yeah.
I don't know if it was The Assassin. In a cage, and it was absolutely incredible. And who was the ref? It was Gene Anderson?
Gene, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Ole's brother.
But it was absolutely incredible because the heat that night in the Omni, the place was just going wild. And people were trying to climb in the cage. Grown men were crying. Look, it was so real. It was so, Florida was great though. And again, we had so many angles in the state of Florida that were great. And Jeff was part of an article that we did 10, 15 years ago. We talked about the top 25 angles to ever take place in the state of Florida. And we just had so many. But I would say for me, Ernie Ladd turning heel on Miami Beach. That was
Barry,
another
you didn't mention Dusty's babyface turn, his original.
Well, that's from a historical standpoint, that could be one of the most important angles of all time. Absolutely.
Well, you say Omni. Remember how Ernie Ladd always pronounced it Omni? He threw an extra syllable in there. I'm coming to the Omni. I remember Ernie Ladd for the thumb. That was his big thing. Which didn't seem like the most damaging wrestling move of all time, but the thumb was
just that television announcer.
Yes. One other name that just came up, and because I had Craig Minervini on Monday, and of course he very early in his career he was working with the McMahon family in WWF at the time.
Craig
the George. And he talked about Andre the Giant, who he said he got along with. He said we weren't exactly friends, but professionally we were fine, except one time he made Andre mad during a live interview and tried to pull the mic away, and Andre was not finished speaking. And that was the, and then here comes the mic, here comes the arm, here comes part of Craig in the air until Andre decided he was done speaking.
There's a biography of Andre the Giant that's just come out within the last few months, Barry?
Yeah.
By Pat Laprade and Bertrand Hebert, 2 guys from Montreal or Quebec that knew him. And it might be one of the best wrestling biographies that I've ever read. And I've read probably 40 to 50 of them. It's an outstanding book. Really it talks about his life and how there were a lot of his life that was very sad. You don't think about a man his size, just like the problem of flying, just boarding a plane, and and space accommodations in a hotel, or getting a car to take him from the airport to the arena. or the airport to a hotel, the accommodations in a vehicle that a man of his size had to deal with. And, it led him to be very depressed, which is why he drank a lot, because he also knew he was going to have a very short life. But that book, Andre the Giant book by Pat LaPrade and Bertrand Hebert, is outstanding if you really want to read a good wrestling biography.
Oh, I'd love to, because we're starting to learn more about him. I thought HBO did a great job with that documentary about a year and a half ago now, and telling more of the story. I think if you were into wrestling, you kind of knew most of it, but for the people who'd only seen him maybe in The Princess Bride and sort of knew he wrestled, I've always felt a tinge of sadness about that famous WrestleMania 3, because that was really the last glorious part of his career. And here's people throwing crap at him as he goes away off the ring after losing to Hogan. And it's like, gosh, I wish you guys really appreciated him more just because he turned into a bad guy. You guys don't really realize what you're going to be missing.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that earlier in his career, in the late 70s, into the early part of the 80s, when he was still in relatively good shape, he would wrestle in Japan and was wrestling as a bad guy in Japan. His name was the Monster Rusimov. Is that it, Barry?
Rusimanov, something like that.
That was his real name, right?
Well, yeah, and he was incredible. And because at that point he could still kind of move around, he could take bumps, and he wasn't as limited physically. By the time he wrestled Hogan, he was extremely limited because he had real bad back problems. But the stuff in Japan when he was younger was fantastic.
Well, that was the other thing. You mentioned travel in Japan. I've heard about the nightmare he would have. And of course, you talk about people who couldn't walk down the street without being recognized.
Sure.
And in Japan, they have such a passion for wrestling. And the accommodations, everything was too small. The beds, chairs, every single thing was built for that nation and not for a man of his proportions. And I can't even imagine the struggles that he had just for the most basic functions that we take for granted.
And as I said, that's part of what led him, and think about it, a man of his physical I'm going to say limitations, because of, the fact that he was so large. He didn't want to go back to his hotel room, and because the bed probably didn't fit him. It didn't make any sense for him to go back to the hotel room and sit there by himself. So he would go down to the hotel bar and he would start drinking, wine or beer. And stories about Andre drinking, I don't have to, Barry can tell you, legendary.
Oh yeah, and they're out there too. And it does seem that whenever they interview a wrestler that knew Andre, always the drinking stories always come up. It's, and you hear these, he would set records on how much he could drink. But he was. You're right. What you were saying, in that at the end of his career, both were right. It was sad. I don't know if he hated that people were throwing things at him, because it's a reaction. And in professional wrestling, the greatest thing you can get is a reaction, whether positive or negative. It's the silence that you never want to get, because that means you're not resonating with people. But he was at the very tail end of his career. He knew it. Vince McMahon knew it. Obviously, Hogan knew it as well. And he had one last run, and what a career the man had.
Last question for you guys before I cut you loose. If you could just pick one match for a main event, you book it, you pick two guys. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what era. Barry, I'll start with you. Just one main event, two guys that you think would be a perfect match, even if they have, whatever it is. Who would you go?
Absolutely. So I was always, when it comes to professional wrestling, I would say I'm a purist. I don't know what that means. I'm a purist in professional wrestling. I have no idea, but I do like the wrestling aspect of it. And if you could have put Jack Briscoe in his prime versus Kurt Angle in his prime, that's probably a dream match for me.
All right, Jeff?
I would probably say wrestling legend has it that in the early part of the decade of the 80s, that as they were beginning to get away from Harley Race, who was getting older, that the three main candidates that the National Wrestling Alliance wanted to have as their world champion were Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, and Ted DiBiase. Now, Ted DiBiase had begun a run in Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling, but he was regarded as, probably for about a 5-year period, the best wrestler in that area. So because he wasn't nationally seen the way that Dusty and Flair were, he was probably the greatest wrestler that nobody saw nationally until he became the $1 million man.
$1 Million Man, right? Yeah.
And so I would say probably in a good venue with good solid wrestling fans. I hated like shows that were done at like the Superdome or an outdoor stadium where you couldn't feel the crowd reaction. But like a Flair DiBiase match from maybe like the Omni in Atlanta or Municipal Auditorium in New Orleans, where the fans were really going to be reacting, either positively or negatively, but you're definitely going to be getting that reaction. Two guys at their prime.
Remember, Jeff, that's the Omni.
The Omni.
The Omni.
You call it that too. The Omni.
Yep. I would have to have Jack Briscoe. It's funny you said Jack Briscoe, Barry, because I thought, I kind of missed that professionalism he had. And then I would have to put Flair in there because the one thing Flair did that, and I've heard other people talk about it, is that Ric Flair sold you as well as he sold himself.
Right.
And that was one of the reasons that, and that dude wrestled hour every time he would go in there, it seemed like, especially with Steamboat. And he gave you the show that you were hoping you were going to get with all the flair that went with it, so to speak. And so I think I'd like those two. I think, and you'd have endurance would not be an issue with either one of them. So if it was interesting, I think I would go with that.
Yeah.
Which means we didn't mention anybody from the current era, which could be a problem.
The amazing
gentlemen,
you mentioned Jack
Briscoe
please. Real quick. One of the things that's interesting, and Barry and I have talked about it on the show, is Jack Briscoe was a guy who smoked. And it's amazing that a guy could go out and have 60-minute matches and then afterwards go and start puffing away on some cigarettes.
Listen, when I covered the first team I ever really covered as a kid reporter, as a late teenager, was the Fort Lauderdale Strikers in the old North American Soccer League. So we'd go in there afterwards, and I'd have my little 5-pound recorder, like this, half hunched over, and there'd be 5 or 6 guys who just finished 90 hard minutes, still in their uniform that's stuck to their bodies, lighting firing off a heater. And I looked at that, I go, no, that doesn't jive. I don't get it.
Nene Kubias.
I don't know if he was one of the smokers. The guy I remember the most, who I think must have had 3 before we ever even asked it, was Maurice Thunderboot Whittle, who was an outside back, number 2, and had a left foot that could get it from Fort Lauderdale all the way down to Miami if you gave him a chance. And he was, man, did he fire those things up one after the other when the game was over. Gentlemen, again, Breaking Kayfabe podcast. Jeff, your books that people can find anywhere, I assume. We give us some titles because you are a prolific dude.
Crowbarpress.com. The books are Breaking Kayfabe, Dinners with the Legends of Wrestling, and then the second book is They Call Me Booker.
That's the one I've got to get. I've read Breaking Kayfabe, and I thought it was fantastic. And I know the restaurant you went to, which is also fantastic. And I should ask for your table next time. Barry, you have anything other than Wiz or that was out to let us know about?
Well, I'm sitting on my couch a lot, so I can let you know about that. I do spend a lot of time here, but right.
By the way, Dave, since we are a Facebook group and a podcast that are dog friendly, I know you have a dog. What is your dog's name?
Riley.
Hey, hold up, Tiger. I was about to start plugging stuff. You're
okay. Well, I know. Okay.
I got a half an hour plug coming up right here, so you hold on with that. But
I'm going to start boiling water for pasta for lunch, so you plug away and let me know when you're done.
Yeah, I not a whole lot going on. We were running Fan Fest in the Tampa area where we were bringing in retired legends from Florida. So we had Ricky Steamboat, Barry Windham, J.J. Dillon, Kevin Sullivan, the original assassin, Jody Hamilton. We did 6 events over 3 years. Unfortunately, this past year, we haven't had the opportunity to do one with everything that's going on, but we're hopeful that next year in 2021, we'll be able to come back. And Dave, you're invited. Please come down to Tampa and spend a little time with us.
I would love to do that. I think there's always been a conflict, but next year, who knows what I'll be doing next year. So I would love to do that because
you get about being the moderator. That's all I'm going to say, LaMont, because they've already got a moderator.
No, I would go up strictly as a fan, and then I would just heckle the moderator from a distance.
I'm sure you would.
Yeah, I would wear a mask, and then pull it off rather dramatic. Now we wear masks. It used to be cool. Now we have no choice. Now if you take your mask off, it is loser leaf town. Guys, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you on your third year of doing this, and it's so much fun being a part of your group. And thanks for letting me in. And best of luck to you both, and best health to you both. And again, Jeff, my best to Kim, and Barry, my best to your cheesesteak maker.
I appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Well, I must say this: so long from the Sunshine State.
Love it.